We have 1 hour, so might as well stop a little bit more quicker than usual. So this is going to be about economics and development, basically. Let's start like this. What are some of the issues you guys face when you debate economics or economics of development or motions like this? What are some of the types of motions you struggle with and stuff like this? Yeah.
Like, for example, World Bank and stuff like that. When you have like huge foundation and they are going to give money somewhere and
all right. So international financial and monetary institutions. IMF, I assume, is also there.
yeah.
Okay. Other than that.
For me, it's that I know so little.
Okay, so it's just like general knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay. Something else specifically?
How to know when it's in economics? Motion.
How to figure out if you are supposed to run economy? Okay. Other than that. Alright.
But like come across, like not come across as bad. Like even if I have like good arguments and everything and they're all legitimate, just to like come across as in a better light.
Also,
No, what I'm saying that it comes across in a good way.
Okay. Well, what's the problem there? Do you think like you?
I think the problem is that when you present economic arguments, you might appear to be very, let's say, an evil capitalist.
Oh, okay. No.
So
Yeah.
even if all your arguments are legitimate, just so that it doesn't.
Yeah, how to actually trump someone who's playing the moral card, the moral high ground, how to actually trump them with
Yeah.
the practical aspect of the
You
argument.
have that huge issue of having to deal with that.
Okay. Someone wants to say something here.
and in the point at which we do have some knowledge, but it's not useful, and we do not know shit about economics, and the motion is set what to do that.
So when you
How
know.
to approach economic motions, generally.
Okay. So how to win in economics?
Yes.
All right. So I have a couple of things prepared. I'll try to incorporate all the stuff you guys told me, but also like ask questions if you don't follow, or like give examples or give motions as we go.
And the difference between macro and microeconomics.
Mm-hmm. Right. All right. So since this is framed as or phrased as economics of development, I'm going to start with a basic concept of investments. Right? You probably all know what investments are. When election day is getting sooner and sooner, all of your governments claim that there's more investments than before, and that they are somehow responsible for this, that they brought you prosperity and money and jobs and stuff like that. So basically the concept of investment is that you forego your spending opportunity in the status quo in order to get a return later on, right? So if you have 100 something, there's two options. You can either spend it right away or like reserve it for spending. That means like spending it on clothes, on stuff, on buying services and goods, or you can invest it. If you invest it, that means that for some period of time you're not going to be able to use this money, right? Because you're probably going to buy machinery, you're probably going to buy goods for your company, you're probably going to buy land, you might buy some patents and stuff like this, you're going to build stuff and all. So you're not going to see that money for some period of time. But at a point later on, you're going to get some return for that investment. So it's very similar with the concept of saving in a bank, right? If you put the 100 kunas that you have in the status quo in a bank, in 5 years, you're going to get this interest. So you might get 120, right? But in that 5 years, the bank can do whatever it wants with the money, and you cannot come to the bank and say, I want my money right now, right? If you had 100 kuna and you didn't put it in the bank, you would be able to do with it what you want. The same concept, but of course with a lot more money, happens with investment. And the crucial thing here is that all of the governments want to attract investments and all of the companies want to invest in the best place for them, right? That's why specifically when the big company is looking for a place to invest in a region or stuff like that, countries are going to compete for this investment. They're going to try to offer better conditions for the company, less tax, you know, like maybe some free infrastructure and stuff like this. This is something that happened in the United States with, when Amazon was looking for a headquarters, right? They were trying to build this new plant or this new building where they're going to headquarter their global operations, and they put like a public tender where all of the cities could apply and say, look, here's what we are offering to you, here's our like conditions, blah blah blah. Come to our city, open up a plant to our city, and not go to like some other city. Eventually, I think Seattle, Valley, and stuff like this. So here's what's most important for people who are investing. There's one crucial concept that you can use in almost every sort of debate, whether it increases or decreases, and that's the concept of risk, right? So every investment is risky, because necessarily there's always going to be some sort of investments that are going to fail, right? You're not going to do what you want, you're not going to get the return that you want, the investment is just not going to end up being good. When we talk about developing world, especially about the economics of development, these risks are higher for a number of reasons. So if you do business in the United States, and let's say someone is owing you money, so they don't pay for the services that you gave them, right? You sell them a product, and they never pay you back. It is comparatively a lot more easier to get this money back, to sue in court, and to get it this way, than it would be in Croatia, right? In Croatia, the process of getting your money back in this situation would be something very, very hard. The same goes with, for example, settling some trade disputes and stuff like this, right? So if you go to court in the United States and you say, look, this company stole my patent, right? They didn't pay for the use of my patent. I came up with this idea and they just stole my thing. I need some sort of compensation because they put a lot of money in developing this, like I put a lot of effort, I had a lot of researchers working on this. This is going to be resolved fairly quickly, right? And you're going to get some sort of compensation, or that company is going to be banned from using this product, right? And then you can go on and sell your product as it was before they stole your patent. In other countries where the legal system is not so efficient, where there's more lag and stuff like this, example then again being Croatia, this might take a little bit more time, right? So if I'm an investor and I'm looking at this, I'm obviously more prone to choose the country where I'm going to have less risk, right? Because I don't want to risk my investment. This is my money, like I earned it and I want it back. I want to have a return, but I don't want to take extra risk up on the level that I have to take. So why do then companies invest in countries that are less legally safe, that are like less efficient and stuff like this? Because the thing that compensates risk is the thing that the rate of return increases, right? So some of you maybe have betted before in your life, and this is the same concept as well, right? So the return, or like if you put something on a club that's most likely, really likely to win, you're going to get 1 kuna for the 10 kuna you invest. But if you bet on a club that's more likely to lose, you're going to get maybe 20 kunas on each kuna you invested, right? So this is how countries compensate, or how companies invest in all sorts of different places, because there's always this ratio between how much money you're going to get in return and how much money, how much risk there is for you to invest in these countries. How do countries minimize risk? How you can use this in development debate when you talk about IMF and you talk about World Bank and stuff like this. All sorts of things such as increasing taxes, such as political instability and stuff like this, they increase the risk. Why? Because if you come to a country and you build something there, you cannot simply move away to another country. If you build a factory in China and China increases taxes, you cannot move your factory to Vietnam, right? Because it's so expensive, it's not profitable for you to do that, right? So if China has a history, I'm using examples from top of my head, but if China has a history of changing its tax laws and stuff like this as a country, of increasing taxes, then you, as an investor, are very exposed, right? Because they might do the same to you once you enter with your investment there. So that's the first risk. The first risk is the risk of regulatory change, right? So when there's a debate about whether we should, like, change some sort of regulation, stuff like this, it's always useful, or you can always run the argument that this will lead to higher risk for people who are willing to invest in your countries, that there's going to be less investment, and then you're going to have less jobs, less potential in the economy, less innovation, and stuff like this. The second one is the risk of being expropriated. Expropriated is like, just means nationalized, right? Because once you, for example, build an oil plant in a country somewhere, this oil plant again is going to stay in this country no matter what. And the government of this country can, if it thinks this is something that they should do, can nationalize your oil plant. So you invested in building this, you invested in the pipes, you invested in technology, in you pay the construction workers and stuff like this. And obviously, you do not want your money to be taken away by this government. And this happens a lot in countries which do not have like safe, which do not have laws that prevent from this happening. So how do you use this in debate, and how is this relevant? Because oftentimes, if something is going to increase or like better your relationship with international organizations, such as World Bank or IMF and stuff like this, these organizations are then more prone to take part in similar projects, right? So if this is a pie, and this is like big oil coming into your country and investing in your country.
I've heard big boy.
It can be big. So this is without international organizations. So these investors, they are not sure what's going to happen with their investment. In 5 years' time, the government might just take it away. However, if you can get, let's say, the World Bank to finance a little share of this, then it becomes increasingly harder for the government to nationalize your project. Why? Because then they also have to fight the World Bank. And World Bank often controls all sorts of different loans. For example, they finance schools, they offer you better rates of, for example, loans. So if you do this, you might get screwed by a lot more people than just the company who you took the money from or who you nationalized the investment. That's why it's oftentimes in developing debates, when it's about international institutions and stuff like this, the impacts of being integrated in the world market are not always clear, right? So people do and create arguments such as, oh, but it's better if these countries cooperate with big institutions such as the World Bank or IMF and stuff like this. But the impact of this is that you get more trust from the people who want to come to your country and who want to invest in your country. Thus then having more benefits in terms of jobs being opened, the economies that you create, the investments and stuff like this.
But mostly not just the amount of investment, but the quality of investment and what do you want to do in a country, whether it's a short-term investment, hedge funds coming to just drain your resources, or somebody wanting to stick their roots in your country and actually open up a company and doing stuff like that. That's a completely different thing, and it's purely based on the risk of you, how do you say, that perceived, what are you going to do? Are you going to nationalize? Are you going to do something like this?
So there's more risk here. If this is 3 years and this is 1 year, there's always more risk in 3 years. Because that's how life works. If I were to ask you, what are you going to do in 3 years time, there's less factors that you cannot calculate in this answer. Versus 1 year time, you probably are sure what you're going to be doing and stuff like this. The same happens here as well. Because there's all sorts of different stuff that these companies or governments also cannot change, or they don't have necessarily all of the effect. One of the biggest one is oil. You cannot influence the price of oil, right? So it just depends on too much factors. No one can predict it.
Not just the price of oil, price of any, how do you say, raw goods is going to be determined by the global market, because if you demand me to give you something cheaper and I can sell it for more expensive than someplace else, I'm just going to sell it for more expensive to someplace else. This is something that's very detrimental to the economies that cannot afford this high level of oil or something like this, which means that the costs of goods produced in their countries is higher than what people can afford by their own, how do you say, living standards. So this is the problem of the loads of developing countries, why companies do not want to go there, because like just the price of goods needed to, how do you say, create a certain good is dependent on oil that you need for your factory, dependent on gas, electricity, dependent on raw materials and minerals, that when put together, the, how do you say, good will cost more than anybody can afford in that country, and in this regard, you don't want to open a business there. It's just too expensive or something like that.
Right. So to recap this talk about investments, if you can create the argument that there's going to be more investment or less investment in the country, the first thing how you impact this argument, how you tell it's important, is to lower it down to the level of your average Joe, your average citizen, to talk about how your average citizen has more jobs opportunity, how there's going to be more taxes that are going to be paid to the government because the company is going to move in, and thus the government is going to be able to spend like more money on education, on healthcare and stuff like this. But also on a slightly more advanced level, you talk about how investments are important for the general economy of this country, and why a lack of capital goods in the status quo makes these investments more powerful than in advanced countries. I'll explain. So the idea is that in the status quo, you have, if this is a scale, you have very little investments in these countries, right? So there's not a lot of things going on. There's not a lot of companies, there's not a lot of factories and stuff like this. So all of the new investments, or all of the investments in the country, go into building new stuff, right? Very little percentage of this goes into rebuilding this, right? Because look at these benches. So look at this chair and look at this chair. This is a new chair, this is an old chair. Eventually, once you build this school, every 20 or like 15 or 25 years, you're going to have to reinvest. Why? Because this is going to get broken. So you're going to have to buy the new thing. Because this projector is going to be shit in 5 years. Because the light bulb inside is going to just be bad. It's not going to project right. It's going to be magic, right? So you have to reinvest. In countries that are developing in the status quo, you don't have to do that. Because there's not a lot of like factories and stuff like this. Which means that all of the investment that flows into these countries is going into new stuff. So new products and stuff like this, which means that there's huge value added in terms of the amounts of jobs it creates, the amounts of demand it creates for the construction industry and stuff like this, right? So this is different to if you already have your industry here, right? Because this is the change from the amount of investment. And if you have it here, then all of this goes to new stuff. That's why China was able to develop so fast, right? Because it started off very low, and it got a lot of investments, and it used these investments to build new factories, production plants, blah, 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 and the economy grew quite fast. So this is when you frame how important investments are in developing countries, you frame it as that. You frame it also with the idea that people in these countries in general are relatively poor, and they do not have capital, which means they are dependent on foreign capital getting in. Because the United States does not need capital from the European Union or Russia that much. Because there's huge amounts of capital inside the country. If we're talking about Congo, there's not a lot of capital in Congo. So they are dependent on foreign capital flowing in and actually enabling them to start some projects and stuff like this.
And you can say that this is like unjust, that there is a majority of capitalism in America, China, or something like this, but this is just the way the world works currently, and there's nothing you can change about this. So in this current situation, the only way to get this money from their side into your homes and into your country is to just try and fight for these investments. And like these fights for these investments, how do you do them, what will happen, is actually the parts of the debate that will happen the most. The risk, is the influence of risk is, as I said to the advanced group, 99% of the debates about the economy are going to be, does this increase or decrease risk of investment, and hence does this make us, how do you say, richer or poorer in that metric, in that regard. But in terms of the other spectrum of risk, the only way to, how do you say, that's the premium point, the only way to offset the huge risk of, I don't know, I don't want to invest in Congo because there's all of the risks that Lovro told you about, or something is to offer a very high premium, which is like a high return of investment. Some promises that the government is going to make to a company. For example, if Fiat comes to Serbia, we're going to promise that they're not going to pay taxes for 3 years or something like this. That you're going to promise them that they can fire as much workers as they can or something like this. So this is where you talk about the clash about deteriorating workers' rights and deteriorating environmental rights that you are going to offer to company just to come to your place, especially because that's increasing the premium of investment and simultaneously making it more bearable to bear that risk of going there into that country. So that's basically a clash.
So yeah, once the same way as governments can affect these investments in a bad way, they can nationalize them or increase taxes and stuff like this, and that's why investors are kind of like sometimes afraid and they are very wary of like doing business with the government because the government might screw them over. The same way these investors have power over the government, right? Because if they move a huge amount of the capital they invested in the country, if they go out of the country, then the government loses a lot of tax money, and the government is going to have probably bad PR because it's going to be presented as someone who does not care about investments, like who does not care about like having a healthy business climate and stuff like this, right? So the relationship is very like interdependent in a way. You wanted to ask?
How do we frame when the motion is set at like a country which has like huge amounts of discrimination and not discrimination, like it's politically very fucked up.
But what would be the motion? I
don't know, like this house, I don't know, believes that World Bank should invest in, I don't know.
That's not going to be a motion.
That's not going to be a motion.
The World Bank should invest somewhere, it's not going to be a motion. What can be a motion is whether the rules of the IMF or World Bank should be, I don't know, austerity, or should be taking the monetary policy of a certain country and operating by themselves as supporters of this world. It's not never going to be a specific country about something, but like whatever you have a specific country, discrimination, discrimination, horrible stuff that can happen. The frame is always the comparative for these people is not having any jobs in the first place, and like just yeah.
Does that answer? Yeah.
Are we going to also talk about infrastructure maybe?
You mean like infrastructure investment, or?
I mean, one belt rotation.
Oh yeah, we can talk about that.
Sure. I mean, China is bad.
So,
lecture over.
Also, when it's in economics motion, do you have to have every time a mechanism of how you're going to do that?
what do you mean do what? Like a model? You mean a model?
Yeah.
No, it's usually the debates are pretty straightforward. So debates are IMF should not ask how they say for austerity measures from countries, or IMF should ask for collateral when they're loaning the money, or as I said, IMF should operate over the economy of this, or Belt and Road Initiative is good for how do you say Central Asian nations or whatever nations. So there is never going to be, almost never, this is going to be few points of model, because this is a very complex thing and people do not expect you to know how to make a model out of it.
Can we make some like practice? Like you give us a motion and then we have to figure out the argument. I think that would be helpful.
Okay, we can do that.
But we still haven't covered. This is 10% of the lecture. Like, there's so many things to cover. Yeah. Like you can struggle with one motion, or we can tell you 10 motions how to do them. That's, I mean, in terms of time constraints, it's better to practice on an actual motion than to practice during the round. I mean, it's your call, it's your lecture.
Let's continue with the lecture, and then we're gonna see if we're gonna have time. And maybe at the end we can do one motion, and we can like do first principles and stuff like this. That's tied to development. All right. So investments are a huge part of all of economic development, economic motion in general. The second part is trade. So countries trade with each other. It's very beneficial. Some countries export some products, other countries import some products. Generally, the freedom of trade that has happened in the recent decades and like centuries is something that has brought huge benefits, both to people who are consumers and both to people who are producers. The very reason, for example, that cell phones and like general like technical equipment, appliances is very affordable now and almost everyone can own something is due to the part that we are able to trade with countries who can efficiently and very cheaply produce these things, right? So the fact that cell phones are produced in China makes it more accessible for people here in Croatia or in the region or in Europe to buy these cell phones because the price of this is lower than if it would have been produced here. Now, obviously, there's a downside to it, and that sometimes people lose jobs because the production moves elsewhere. And this is the fundamental reason for a lot of clashes that are happening in the status quo, for a lot of trade wars. So specifically with Trump, and with other countries as well, the EU with the relationship with China, people are, I'm not going to say like sick of it, but they are worried about the idea of China taking even more power because its production base is so huge and because they can export to all of their products to other countries and stuff like that. So the solution that they have from this is to install some sort of protectionist measures, right? So the opposite of free trade, where you don't have any tariffs, where you don't have any controls that are meant to like stop foreign products from entering the country, is the idea of protectionism.
But that's a bit of an understatement of what China is doing. China is literally investing government money into companies that then compete on a natural scale. This means that the competition is, and this is how you frame China, the reason why China can be so successful is particularly because they're spending so much of their government funds in order to, how to say, outcompete other companies. The problem with private companies doing this is that they don't have the support from US government or something like this. So, secondly, problem with China is China has never been adhered to, how do you say, intellectual property rights, which meant that they are pretty much stealing technology that is not available, and patents that are available in the US are being stolen and taken by Huawei and stuff like that. They're being accused numerous times of this. So they are not operating, and the thing that Trump said, which he's correct about in this sort of scenario, is basically that they're not operating under the rules. The question is, how do we curb that, what they're doing? The answer is, I'm not sure that this is going to curb it, but I'm not sure that anything is more of a pessimist. But the issue is China is causing a lot of problems. China is competing on a level that is not really, how do you say, great. And this is especially true, sure. US can compete with China in metrics, they can produce good stuff. But if we compare developing countries, African countries that have free trade agreements with China because of the Belt and Road Initiative and stuff, it ruins the parts of the economy that were good in these countries. So for example, you do sign on to Belt and Road, they do give you, how do you say, they do give you the railway in Kenya, but they also, you sign a free trade agreement with them, and they bomb your country with textile that is cheap as it gets, and your people lose their jobs because your people cannot compete with cheap textile from China, because you don't have as large an economy of scale, because you don't, how do you say, have the government investing to help you use that industry. Yes?
I would disagree with that. I would say that, I mean, I'm not sure how much you've read actually the One Belt Road Initiative and that whole funding system, but from my perspective, I believe the version that because China has a growing middle class, also the cost of production is rising, and once they want to sell products to countries, they also want these countries to develop in order for people to buy products that are more expensive.
Sure, but that's empirically not true. If we see Kenya, if we see Algeria, if we see a lot of the countries, where they have. So they do want these people to develop, but you know what they want? They want Chinese companies to have and spearhead that development. So it's not going to be a company from Kenya that is now operating the textile industry. It's going to be fifth company from China that is going to be, like, basically China is doing the similar thing that the US is doing with MNCs. There's like multinational companies selling all around. With China is doing that and taking over industry in certain countries by just investing and pushing a lot of money and pushing out the competition. The byproduct of that is that lots of people are losing their jobs and that lots of people are mad at China at this point. And this is why you had a lot of government protests in Kenya, a lot of instability in other countries, because they feel like they got nothing and that like only the ruling class and stuff like that got something in this sort of situation. So I'm not saying that the Belt and Road is necessarily always bad, but it means that some of the projects are not, first of all, not sustainable, Montenegro, and some of the projects are just not sustainable and will become debt traps. But secondly, other things that you need to do in order to appease China, like opening your borders completely to the Chinese goods, is not necessarily something that is always good for your economy, especially if your economy is based on production, your employment is based on certain productions and stuff like that, because no matter how their middle class is rising and how high their prices get or something like this, it's still going to be cheaper because of the economy of scale than things that Kenya can produce in a very old, outdated, technologically inferior factory and stuff like that. So whatever they do, they will still be more competitive than them, and they can price them up and push them towards it. This is where, I mean, I personally believe in free trade agreements, and I'm more of a conservative in that metric, but if you want to frame in the debate, the protectionism is framed in a way that some companies and some countries just cannot compete on the global market in the beginning, because there's such a huge disparity between technology that China, US, MNCs can do and technology that is in your country, which means that if you open up your borders, your industries are destroyed. They're just going to be dominated by these companies who doesn't have that much incentive to develop your country, rather than take your resources away from it.
So that's basically a problem. Yeah.
Just for a while.
Last time on the China, because no one.
Just on your point about China. But why do you believe that China is the investor that is like the most evil? Like you have other investors like Monsanto taking over the India.
Sure, both of them are evil.
The Indian papers to sell different products and stuff like that.
I agree, but both of these can be true at the same time.
Yeah, but China, at least from the difference, other companies at least like build roads and build schools and hospitals and stuff like that, for example, in Africa. I mean, not maybe as much as they did in the time of colonialism, but they still do these things from the difference that all these other big corporations don't, because they don't have an interest in actually like making the economy and the whole situation of the country better.
They don't do it for free. Everything is paid, and that's a loan. So China is not a great developmental aid. If you want to compare, developmental aid is free in some manner, but like China is not really developmental aid. These are loans coming to these countries that will need to be repaid. Two, people who work on these fields are Chinese workers. So in the 99% of the facts, when you build this road and build this railroad, you build it, how do you say, you give it to your own workers. Three, China is very much willing to give this money to dictatorships and to give this money to people who will not give this to their people and not develop their people. Kenyatta and like a lot of other dictators in China. So China is not the worst. Obviously, there's worse people and stuff like that, but it's still pretty bad, and it's still arguably leading people to taking a lot of loans that they cannot repay. For example, Montenegro will not be able to repay China for the thing that they're doing, and what China does in that circumstance is they take away some part of your land, take away collateral. You can see Sri Lanka in taking away of, how do you say, a port and like lease for 100 years. They're pretty much doing the same thing that was done to them during that period. So the issue is whether strong China and whether this thing is actually good for your country and something like this. This is where the debate will happen. And I'm not saying like there's obviously both sides, but you need to keep in mind the side and the negative aspects of Chinese investment, the negative aspect of any investment whatsoever. But at least West has to pretend to care about some of the other issues, and there is more push and power because it's a democracy from the people to care about some of the things. So if I had to say there is a small, how do you say, difference, I would say I would go this side rather than the other.
Alright, so you guys can continue this at some other time maybe. So basically what Miloš was saying is that there's this argument about having an infant industry, which means that the industry is very small, it's not yet developed, it cannot compete with other people in the market, so it's sometimes legitimate and economically reasonable that you protect this industry from foreign competition, and if you do so, then the industry can develop on the domestic market, and then later on it can go into other markets as well. That's something that happened with Huawei, then Xiaomi. Xiaomi, yeah, Xiaomi. Because these products were first developed in the Chinese market, and then they later on moved out, and now they are like competing with all of the different mobile phone companies globally and stuff like this. So this is an argument about how you can develop your industry through protectionism. This is an argument for protectionism in debates that are going to be about like reducing trade barriers and stuff like this. But do you guys have questions about this?
You can talk about the resource curse. Resource curse.
Okay, resource curse, the Dutch disease. So at one point, Dutch people got a lot of gas, mostly gas, but also a little bit of oil. So you know, like
67.
Yeah. So this is.
So you would presumably say that if you discover a lot of natural resources in your country all of a sudden, you would be very rich and your country would be powerful, right? This thing is like this concept is trying to question that, especially like in the context of mismanagement of resources and stuff like that. So there is like a thing called resource curse in terms of that it's not always productive to have resources, and this is usually a comparative between Congo that has one of the largest reserves of metals and stuff like that, but is a very much failed state in terms of that, and compare that to Rwanda, for example, who has that have nothing, but are way richer, even though they were in war and they suffered genocide and stuff like that. And this is going to explain that.
Yeah, so basically the analogy goes back to 60s, 70s when Dutch discovered a lot of gas in the North Sea. And then at that point the economy really boomed because of that, and almost all of the investment in the country went into building these offshore plants in the North Sea and like bringing back the gas and stuff like this. And now the problem is that during that time, because this was very profitable and the returns on the investment you made in gas were the highest you could get in the country and in the economy, all of the other investments were squeezed out, right? So all of the capital moved towards like new gas projects, exploration, upstream and stuff like this. And all of the other investments that should have taken place in the economy were squeezed out. So there was not a lot of them. And the consequence of that was that after some period, of course, Dutch companies, other companies except the gas industry and the oil industry, started falling back after their competition. Because all of the investment that once used to go to these projects, so I don't know, like modernizing the tulip production, or modernizing the cheese production, wine production, stuff like this, they were squeezed out by this oil and gas industry. And after some time, when the oil and gas eventually ran out, they were left with a really, really innovative industry of oil and gas that didn't have any sort of further potential because they couldn't dig up more gas and oil because it was gone. And all of the other industries in the economy were at a much more worse state than before because of this curse and because of the...
So it's anti-diversification, which means that if the price of goods, so for example, all of the other parts of the world that then discover gas, decrease the price of gas because there is more supply, which means if your economy is based on just this, and this is what fucked Venezuela and Saudi Arabia currently, because US found a lot of oil on their field by doing fracking and stuff like that, and US has become, this is why the arguments about US is doing stuff for oil doesn't work in 2019, because US is moving towards being an exporter of oil, so they're not even buying it anymore. They don't care. They would just rather keep it low and fuck the competitors. But the other aspect of Dutch disease that is very important is, if you have a good that people want, that is very, how do you say, desirable, whether it's mineral, metal, oil, gas, or whatever you want, then you create a demand for that product from your country. The way that people buy the product from your country is by buying your currency and then buying stuff from you, right? So there was guilders at that time, or whatever you want to do, kunas, or whatever. If Croatia finds something, people need to buy your currency in order to buy your stuff in this sort of situation, so they need to give you. So what does this mean? This means that your currency artificially inflates and becomes much more, how do you say, desirable, which means that it's much more quoted better in comparison to euro and stuff like that, which is good for the industry itself and stuff like that, but it's very bad for the other industries who have their price of goods then increased, of goods to produce other stuff, right? Because like now, for the same money, for the same amount of guilders, I could have bought, I don't know, enough plants to do the whole field or something like this. Now I have to spend double that guilders inside of that country if I want, because the prices of everything increased. And I didn't get the benefit from their prices. The people who got the benefit from their prices is the industry that boomed, which is the oil and gas industry or whatever, or something like this. So you're artificially moving and fucking the other industry, not just in a way that all the investment got there because like it was desirable, but because other industries become undesirable because of the prices increase, because price of goods is gonna plateau, like amount of money that you have is gonna plateau. Also, the amount of money that then you have to charge. If you want to, for example, after that, if you want to export your agriculture or whatever, because it costs so high in your country to produce it, you can sell it only for the higher price in this sort of situation. So you're less competitive against other countries who can sell the agriculture for a lower amount of price because their price of goods is lower themselves or something like that, because somebody is not in this country. So this is, for example, why China wants to keep their currency low, why China is afraid of their currency growing and being maybe overpassing the dollar or something. This is why they're trying to artificially lower their currency. Because if for the same amount of money, for $1, I can buy 2 pence from China, but Chinese yen rises and now they're 1 to 1, so I can buy 1 pen from China. But there is another currency, for example in Thailand, where I can buy 3 pence, I will just move to another country and buy it from them, and they will be more sustainable. So this is why for development and for people who are export economies, because they're competing against each other, it might be good to have a lower currency, or how do you say, lower trade value. Yes?
I don't know much about it, but can you explain how they're doing that? Because I don't.
Oh, so the way that China, so it's illegal to try to, so currency is basically based on supply and demand for the currency in the global market. It's not supposed to be influenced. For example, when it is tempered directly, it just doesn't work. For example, when Maduro set Bolivar 1 to 4 for dollars, nobody wants to do that trade, so they're just going to the black market and buying the regular rate or something like that. So that doesn't work. But the way that China does is actually, how do you say, creating the demand for dollar in terms of buying the debt, how do you say, buying buying up the US bonds and buying up the stuff and creating and pooling US dollars towards them. So making dollars more scarce and hoarding dollars in a way makes dollars more desirable because there's less of the dollars in this sort of situation. So this is how they're trying to, I mean, obviously you can go so far, but like, this is the accusation that China has probably been doing and stuff like that. So you cannot influence, you can influence your own, obviously you can influence your own supply. For example, printing more money. But the issue with printing more money is that you risk inflation of your own currency and that you risk horrible things happening, like they did in the Germany during the 40s and stuff like that, which leads to like inflation and like inflating of prices and stuff like that can lead to the opposite effect and people losing faith in your economy, and then that can spiral out of control and go to the hyperinflation like I felt when I was a kid.
And also like this is now into economics. How central banks control the rate of the currency is whether they buy or sell the currency. So here's the example in Croatia. Because there's millions of people literally who come here during the summer. They want to exchange their euros or dollars to kunas because they want to spend kunas, they cannot spend euros. So during the summer, there's huge demand for Croatian kunas. So what would happen if the central bank would not intervene is that the rate would be probably something around 5. So you would get 5 kunas for 1 euro, right? Because kuna would get stronger. It's 7 to 1 now, right? So what the central bank does is during the summer, it simply sells a lot of kunas. It sells a lot of kunas to other private banks, which are not the central bank. So it kind of like, increases the supply of kunas in the market. But what it then does in the winter is they buy these kunas from the banks, right? So they essentially, the rate then fluctuates like 0.1, 0.2, it goes from 7.3 to 7.5. And in normal conditions, if it weren't as influenced by the central bank, it would probably fluctuate from 10 to 5. This is of course bad for the economy, and people want to keep the currency stable and stuff like this. So this is how it always transcends to this supply and demand for your currency mechanism. One more thing that's important here. While oftentimes people fuck up with these devaluations and stuff like this, is that people forget you have to buy intermediary products for your production. So this doesn't work in China, because China produces everything inside China. So they buy all their products that they need for production in Chinese yuan, right? So they don't care about this. But if you are, let's say, a company that has to buy some pipe in order to create a bigger product, then if your currency decreases, you are going to pay more for the pipe. So more people might buy your product eventually because it's cheaper, but you are paying more for the products that you have to fit in order to make the final product. So this is a mechanism of how oftentimes devaluation or like reducing the value of your currency can backfire because you're paying more for importing stuff that you then have to use in order to produce the stuff that you eventually export. So the example would be here in Croatia. If we devaluated our currency, we would comparatively be probably a lot more cheaper compared to Greece or compared to Turkey, right? Because it would, like nowadays it costs 200 euros to get like 7 days of hotel in Turkey. It costs 400 euros probably in Croatia. So if you devaluate your currency, it costs 200 as well in Croatia. But what would be the problem? Every time, for example, our restaurants or like people like in entertainment and stuff like this would want to buy a TV from Germany or would want to buy olives from Greece, they would also pay more, right? Yeah. Because the currency would be weaker, so they would pay $2 for olives, but they would pay 4 euros for olives, right? So this is the trade-off that you essentially have.
But that's basically the trade-off that is happening all the time in the currency. What do you want to do with your currency and stuff like that? And there were debates when we talked about Greece, whether Greece should have returned to drachma rather than euro and stuff like that. And this is the debate about like whether control over your own finances and monetary policy is actually can be a very good, how do you say, positive thing because you can do all of these, increase a bit of inflation or something like this, versus if you're in a union or something like this, you really can't. Yes.
The thing that you mentioned before, what happens during summertime here in Croatia. But why don't more countries do that kind of things, like when like big investments come into the country, why they just sell their kunas to other banks and in that way?
Everybody does to an extent, right? So this is just an example, but like everybody tempers somehow with their thing, but like every action carries with itself a risk in another direction, right? So it's not just purely in control of the central bank. Central bank has the nudging power until the central bank has the, how do you say, belief of the, how do you say, global community that they're doing a good job. As soon as people believe that they're doing something that is wrong, your currency then starts to devalue even more. Because like it's not just based on the amount of stuff. So in theory, it's just going to be based on the amount of money in the pool that is there. But it's also going to be based on desirability of your economy in itself. Like how do I believe that this economy is going to grow or this economy is going to how do you say, be bad? And this is a thing where this is not as scientific as people want to present it, right? This belief that the economies grow or fall is not something that is 100% predicted. We are going closer within AI and stuff like that, but still it's based on some presumption, and this is why we talk this is why, for example, Japan can have such a huge debt and still have a lot of investment coming into them, whilst Greece can have a lower debt than Japan, but will still deteriorate, because people ultimately believe that Japan will persevere longer and will have people who will not let it fall or something like this. This is true for America as well, and America has a ranking debt or something like this, but still people want to invest and still people want to buy stuff because they perceive that it's going to be safe, secure. If worse comes to worse, they're going to go to war to protect their investment or something like this. So you're cushioned against something, and these countries that are cushioned can tolerate more bad policies happening, can tolerate, like if Trump happened in Greece or something like this, the economy would tank. But in the US, we see the opposite, because the perception is that US can get away with whatever they want. And as long as that perception leads for whatever country it is, you will be stronger or not strong. So it's just about the perception.
Yeah. So we have 10 more minutes left. So I don't think we're going to have time to do the workshop, but we can do some of the stuff you guys wanted to do in the beginning, and if you have time, maybe you can ask other questions or something like this. So the first thing is this insensitivity, and this oftentimes happens in debates where you are not for the spending side, right? Because the spending side necessarily, they spend money, they help people, people have more money, blah, blah, blah. It's very intuitive, and then someone just, pushes the word equality out, and then it's over, the debate is won. So I think that a very useful framing to deal with this is the framing of the value of money spent versus the value of money not spent. So for every dollar that you're going to spend, or kuna or euro, on, for example, welfare policies, on housing, public housing, or on education, or healthcare, and stuff like this, you are eventually going to have a return, right? This is going to help people. So if you spend more money on education, people are going to be better educated. If you spend more money on public housing and supported housing, there's going to be less homeless people and stuff like that. But the problem with that is that and how you can frame it if you have to go against this, is that there is never enough, right? So there's always something more. There's always going to be people who are still not going to be well off. There's always going to be people who are still going to be poor, who are still going to be homeless, who are still going to be unemployed, blah, blah, blah. No matter how much money is spent, there's still going to be people who are going to be affected. So you first deal with this idea that the problem that someone is trying to solve is going to be solved solely by this policy. They're still going to exist. And then you introduce a new metric, which is we have to look at how much, as a society, how much value we get for spending $1, and how much value we lose by spending this exact dollar, right? So what is something that we lose by spending money? We lose the ability to react as a country, as a government, in times of crisis. In times of crisis, it's oftentimes you as a government need to increase your spending so that you can kickstart the economy back again, so that you don't end up being 5 years in a crisis and with the economy crashing and stuff like this. You lose in terms of the interest your people pay, right? So every time you go and you want to take a loan for your car or for your apartment or for something like that, the country that you're doing this in, the risk of that country defaulting and everything going to hell is incorporated in this loan, in this interest, right? That's why in Germany they have 1% interest for people who are buying flats, right? If you want to buy a house or a flat, you're only going to have 1% interest. In Croatia, it's maybe 4 or 5. I assume if you go more east in Serbia, it's probably a little bit more, because the EU decreases some sort of systemic risks, and they're going to bail us out if all hell breaks loose. So you eventually have citizens paying more for their houses, for their for example, their cars and stuff like this, if you spend this extra dollar. You also probably have more, less idea or less incentive for people to save, right, in the government. You're going to have more spending that's spent on corruption, more spending that's spent on inefficient things. Once people know that the spending is less limited than it could have been otherwise, right? So these are all the stuff how you eventually, the point of all of this, is you eventually do the impacts on the little man, right? You show how your little man pays more with his already small paycheck every month so that he can buy a flat. You show how he's going to be the first one who's going to get screwed once the government is not going to be able to invest and to like maybe bail out the company in terms of prices. So this is how you compete with an argument that's very intuitive and very persuasive from the opposition that's saying, but we need to help these people who are suffering from inequality and stuff like this. Because you also present a way in which they are harmed by your policy. In addition to all of the other stuff we can say, like rebuttal and other framing and stuff like this. This is how then you become less insensitive, because you're talking about the same group of people in the end. And you frame these maybe big concepts in terms of we should be, like we should not spend too much money than we have, we should be like conservative, we should have a balanced budget and stuff like this. You break it down to the small people. This is how you break this veil of like insensitivity and like, ooh, but you're just an evil capitalist and stuff like this. By showing that you talk about the same group of people, they are trying to talk. And they try to have this moral ground over you, oh, but we're helping the poor, and you're just like helping people who are rich. No. You break this deadlock, and this is how you outframe their arguments. You want to add something? Huh? Alright. Alright. And the last thing is that you guys want to talk about is the difference between macroeconomics and microeconomics. And
basically, it's not important. That's the guess.
Yeah, but one sentence. So basically, microeconomics is all of the interactions that happen between specific entities in the economy. So microeconomics would be your local store and what it does in terms of like how it does its spending, how it maybe controls what stuff they buy, what stuff they sell, do its demand go up and sales go up and stuff like this. Also like your wages, if you work somewhere and stuff like this, wages of your parents and stuff like this. Macroeconomics are done on a large scale. So these are stuff as like fiscal policy, monetary policy, like crisis, stability, growth rate, human capital, so everything that's done on the basis of national economies or sometimes even like larger and stuff like this. So the mechanisms of microeconomics are something that deal with how your local firm, or not your local firm, it can be a corporation as well, is doing business, while macroeconomics is done with how countries, let's say, do business, how international organizations do business as well.
So in your analogy, like basically microeconomics create, like there are small subsections of microeconomics are like the cogwheel that make the machinery work, and the macroeconomics are the machine itself and what do you do with it, and stuff like that. But that's never going to be a question in debating and stuff like that. So as I said, like the most important thing in the economics debate is just managing risks, and what do risks, how do you say, what does increased risk lead to less investment and stuff like that? And how does the specific policy influence and target that? That's 99% of the things. And secondly, it can be worked both on the scale of countries doing something or also companies doing something. And I think that if you should take something from this, the risk is a very important factor.
Do you guys have questions?
Did you talk about patents? Did you talk about patents?
I don't agree with that.
Before you finish this, I want to ask you something. You mentioned how there's a correlation between the need to invest in a developing country. Why so again developing or non-developing country? Can you explain that once again briefly, because I guess I didn't get that from you.
Yeah, sure. So all countries want to have investment, right? Investments are something that's good. They bring new products, they bring new services, new corporate culture, new ways of doing things. If, for example, the best examples are telecoms. So I don't know what's the situation in your country, but in Croatia, they privatized the telecom in like 15 years ago or so. And since then, the Deutsche Telekom bought our local telecom, and there's been all sorts of different foreign companies coming in, and this changed the culture, it decreased the prices, that's why everyone wants to have investment. But the thing is, like, if you buy something in Croatia, if you buy a telecom, then the infrastructure is already kind of there, right? So all of the landlines, you had some sort of, like, it was 15 years ago, but you still have some internet data, like the lines, the telephone lines that you can use for internet, they're already there. So if you buy this company, with some of the investment that you invested, you have to rebuild this, right? So let's say a telephone line can only last for like 30 years. So every 30 years, you have to take a huge part of like your infrastructure, take it out, replace it. Comparatively, if you are investing in a country where there's no such infrastructure, all of the investment goes into something new, right? Because you don't have to replace something, you just build new stuff. So for the very short period of time, like maybe 10 to 15 years, from a period of there's very little capital in the status quo, so there's not need to reinvest on the stuff that's already built, you come up with a huge amount of capital. Now then, of course, you're going to have later on a problem that now you're going to have to rebuild all of this stuff, right? That's when like amortization happens and stuff like this. But from the very brief period of time, your growth is very huge. This is something that happened to China, it's happening to Vietnam now, countries in Africa, and stuff like this.
The factor is the only way to develop your country is to have a foreign direct investment. Otherwise, you're just moving money around inside of your country. Foreign direct investment is not just the investment, but any money, new money coming to your country can grow your economy. And that's a zero-sum game. There is not enough, like, money not being here means that it's there or something like that. So it can grow together in terms of, like, we're growing the economy, and this is like why the economy now expanded, we have more rich people or something like this. But still, it's kind of a zero-sum game in terms of, I'm investing here rather than investing in another country. This is what creates this perverse incentive that I told you about, but the name, like this race to the bottom, where I as a country want to attract investment, and the other country wants to attract investment, which means that we're going to fight for this investment by offering this company so much concessions. I'm going to offer them environmental policy, they can pollute my country, who cares? I can offer them, I don't know, labor rights regulations being done. I can offer them no taxes, specifically because that's the only way for me as a politician to actually try and move something around and develop something. Because like if they invest in another country, I literally get zero. I don't get anything from them being there. So I am willing to pay as much as possible, not always, but sometimes, and especially if you're developing for some of these things. And like hoping that if they go there, they're going to stay there for a long time and then develop. This is basically what happened in the Asian, like Asian tigers and Asian countries like Philippines, Vietnam. They were very poor economies, but right now they're much richer than a lot of countries in this sort of situation. But they had to go through a lot of suffering of their people, which meant the child labor force, and horrible, horrible conditions that they had to endure, environmental degradation. But in the end, eventually, when you get enough capital into your own country, then your economy is desirable on its own, and people would want to go there because you have a middle class that can buy stuff. Because you do, but like if you want to start somewhere, like nobody wants to invest, you do have to sacrifice a lot of these things in order to make them go in that direction. So it's like the clash usually in these types of debates. Yes, it's very sad that some people will have to suffer, but the comparative for these people is no development and suffering nonetheless, versus this. And the way to mitigate this is what I just said, and if you don't want this to be just a heavy motion for the thing that is developing, is to try to question how much of a difference does this make. If you, for example, ban people from deteriorating their environmental laws or something like this, it's still going to be cheaper, even if that's true, it's still going to be cheaper for me to invest in Vietnam than to invest in America, because like still, how do you say, labor law. So you are going to have to sacrifice some of the investments, so investments are not going to happen, but it's not that no investments happen under this side of the house. So this is a trade-off, basically, whether we want slower growth and like some equality versus quick growth and how you say deteriorating health. So this is basically how do we want to grow, and both of these things are valid, and both of these things can be traded off. And usually the answer is it's very dependent on a country specific that we're talking about, because sometimes this is not worth it because the investment is not as good, but sometimes it's very worth it if you want to attract, I don't know, Amazon to come to your country or something like this that is going to help. So this is a basic, how do you say, frame and trade-off in this motion.
Do you guys have any other questions? Then thank you for your